Hello and welcome to the FMCC webinar, RICS Futures Are Changing World, presented by Neil Shah, the RICS Regional Managing Director of the Americas. Next slide, please. I do want to let everyone know they have been muted for audio quality, and this webinar is being recorded. If you do have any questions during the webinar, please type them into the question box on your control panel. We'll go over them during the Q&A portion at the end of the webinar. Also, if you'd like a copy of the PowerPoint, there is a PDF version in the handout section on your control panel, which is generally second to the last box. Simply expand it and you can download it now. Next slide. Okay, and this is the vision and mission statements of the FMCC. Next slide, please. And the FMCC provides many services to the FM community, such as Ask the Expert, Find a Consultant, Locate a Speaker, and online educational resources. You may find more information on their website, fmcc.ifma.org. Next slide, please. And as always, we'd like to thank the sponsors of the FMCC. Next slide. And we do want to just thank everyone for joining us for World FM Day. Next slide, please. The FMCC has put together over 30 presentations over the course of the next 4 days in order to celebrate World FM Day, which has really been expanded into World FM Week to highlight what's going on in the different regions around the world. So we'd love for you to join us on our sessions. Next slide, please. And here, next slide is just a snapshot of some of the presenters that will be coming to you over the next few days. Next slide. And at this time, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to our presenter, Neil Shah. Neil, the floor is yours.
Josh, thank you very much. It's my pleasure to join you guys and talk to you a little bit about our changing world and how we can be ready for it. I'll take it off of my bio there, but just so by way of introduction, I'm Neil Shah. I'm the Regional Managing Director of the Americas for RICS. RICS, as you'll see in a second, is a professional body in land, property, and construction, and a partner of IFMA's as well. So I'm going to talk a little bit about a research paper that we've done, and we've done in consultation with the marketplace about what it means for the profession, what the changing world means for our profession. RICS, as you may know, is a leading professional body. We've got qualified individuals in key international markets, and we exist to develop and enforce professional standards and ultimately offer the most sought-after professional status in land, property, construction, and through our collaboration with IFMA, obviously in facility management as well. We are an organization that has been around since 1868. Next year we celebrate our 150th, and through the promotion of standards, we aim to drive thought leadership like this research, increase the profile and credibility of the profession and all the disciplines within the profession, support individuals that are qualified, and ultimately attract the next generation to grow the profession. But because we are an organization with a charter, ultimately what it requires us to do is protect the public interest. And a lot of what we do is about driving awareness and protecting the public interest. Just a quick snapshot of where we are. We're obviously very strong in Europe, Middle East, and Africa with roots in the UK, emerging in the United States, and fairly strong in Asia-Pac. Qualified professionals in 146 different countries and offices in 27 cities around the globe. So everybody's got a view of the future, you know, and if we were to kind of do a Q&A, I'm sure we'd all get different perspectives. This picture happens to be a company called Arup, which is in the engineering services, construction, design business, but Arup's view of the future of rail in 2050. And if you take a close look at that picture, we've got automated passenger trains, we've got automated driverless pods that maybe people are taking an Uber to the train station. We've got drones that are managing traffic, taking pictures. So the view of a transport future is clearly one that's around infrastructure, and you know, for FM, it's about ensuring that we're maintaining that infrastructure going into the future. With this study that we did was across 19 different countries. We ran roundtables, over 400 participants gave us feedback on where they think the profession is going to be over the course of the next 15 to 20 years. We spent 2 years in gathering information, doing surveys, running events. We spent a lot of time really looking through the results and defining the implications, looking at third-party sources, and then testing what we learned. And then over the course of 2014 and 15, we came up with 6 areas that we're blowing out, if you will, for development. And it's those 6 areas that we've worked on now for the last 2 years in terms of where it is that we think the profession's going. If you want a copy of the report, it's out on rics.org/futures. There's also a video. There's also an executive summary. But let's talk about the report. What did we learn? Change is accelerating quickly, and it affects everyone. That the growing complexity of our businesses is making it a challenge to ensure that we're getting a level of consistency and standards. As you'll see in a second, our sector, not just FM, but real estate, construction, the built environment is not viewed as favorably as other sectors in terms of embracing innovation and change, but also from an ethical perspective. And there's also major gaps on sustainability and even resilience, and things that I think the FM sector can actually help promote. The skills needed are changing, and the work roles are changing. Employers, all of the folks on the call, as well as firms out globally, are concerned about the next generation and where that talent comes from. Our own professionals are worried about technology and the pace of change and what that means to your everyday world. And collaboration is critical, and the IFMA RICS collaboration is a great example of that. It's critical to make sure that you've got the right partners that can really drive, have an impact, but really embrace that change, and strong leadership from the profession is necessary. I think part of this is for us to see that there needs to be a change, help impact that change before it starts to impact us. We looked at a couple of different drivers, socioeconomic drivers, the urbanization, of the world. Cities are growing significantly, shifting economic power from Western Europe, even the US and the UK, to India and China in terms of their growth. But we also see some challenges in terms of resource scarcity, not only in terms of energy resources, but things like water, food, changing demographics, where people are aging and where you've got younger populations is changing. And clearly, everywhere we look, there's greater inequality in terms of differences between the haves and the have-nots, and what the profession can do to help facilitate change there. First and foremost, real estate and the built environment as an asset class is increasingly getting more and more significant. And this is a chart that JLL puts out, and it's refreshed every year with their capital flow study. But international capital flows are driving investment from one market to the other, and really increasing the importance of the built environment as an asset class. We also are seeing power in terms of new brands and new opportunities coming from the East. And, China is a significant player in all of that. And you might have heard about One Belt, One Road, China's infrastructure project that will recreate the ancient Silk Road. But ultimately, it's really about being able to grasp some of those changes that are coming in that direction. And another example of how economic power is shifting is by viewing the growth in infrastructure spend. If you look at India and China and Indonesia, which is a rising economy as well, infrastructure spend has grown. Whereas if you look traditionally at countries like the US or Japan, it's shrunk actually. So that infrastructure spend kind of allows us to infer in what's going on in those markets as well. Cities are growing fast. As I indicated, the urbanization, and you'll see in a second, the world is fast moving towards urbanization, but especially in the East. In India, for example, there are needs for cities the size of Chicago that are significant, that they're looking at building a Chicago every year for the next 20 some odd years. So, and there's also uber cities, or significant cities, what are called mega cities with population over 10 million, and you see that that's actually shifting out there as well. I talked a little bit about the population and the aging of population. What's surprising, very many of the major centers, and including China, and China's got a very aging population, but very many of the major centers that we would have contemplated as economic powers are now starting to see the retirement of baby boomers and population changing, from working age to over 65 and beyond. It puts a lot of pressure on governments. It puts a lot of pressure on society in terms of ensuring that individuals have the appropriate services and health care and retirement plans. But there's also in that, there's some opportunity. So surprisingly, there's some areas of the world that are seeing a growing population, as you can see in the blue, of individuals or kids really from 0 to 14 that are now going to, over the course of the next 25 to 50 years, start to really drive the change. And cities are where we're seeing a lot of that population growth as well. In the Western Hemisphere, for example, the Northeast, Mexico City, Sao Paulo, the Northeast part of the U.S. Are areas that we're seeing some of that change. I mentioned a little bit about inequality, and as you look at this graph, there's increased inequality in places that you wouldn't have imagined. So countries that typically have a large middle class, Western Europe, the United Kingdom, New Zealand, the U.S., you're starting to see a big gap between the haves and the have-nots. And this chart shows that it's rising from the mid-'80s until now, and in the early 2000s, that it's continued to get worse. And I don't know how many of you on the call live in major cities, but I live outside of New York City and I work in New York City. That issue of homelessness and income inequality and affordability of living in some of these major centers is gotten to be a challenge as well. And as I said before, water scarcity, resource scarcity in general, it's said that some of the wars in the past have been fought over resources, that water may be one of those in the future. The global demand for water because of population increase is significantly greater, but we're seeing into the future that there's going to be areas that are stressed, and there's scarcity of water is going to be significant. And as we know, that water is foundational in terms of what we're trying to do from an infrastructure standpoint and having clean water for people to survive. That's kind of the broad, high-level demographic changes that are going on. There's a new business landscape as well. We're having this call here on GoToMeeting or GoToWebinar. New technology is enabling us to do lots of different things, and GoToMeeting is probably dated, but you start thinking about mobility and you start thinking about different applications that are available out there. But even beyond that, technology is changing the business landscape. That's driving new business models. And those business models are disintermediating things that we've traditionally counted on, or models that have existed for periods of time. It's also allowed us, technology, the internet, databases have allowed us to really get smarter about the kinds of decisions that we make through analytics and big data, and ultimately trade assets. And real estate, the built environment, property as an asset class has grown in significance over that period of time. If I look at the spider maps that you've got here, it really lays out different types of investments, from private equity, stocks, hedge funds, infrastructure. Real estate increasingly is a favored alternative asset beyond cash, beyond stocks and bonds. Ultimately, the ability to value, the ability to trade, the fungibility of real estate, especially the operating income valuations that are driven by FM, those things become more and more important. Having that data becomes a significant factor as we support real estate as a new asset class. The thing that we talked about before was, whether or not our profession, and I don't mean just FM, I mean people that are in the appraisal business, construction, real estate, brokerage, business services all around the real estate area. If you look at this chart that's created by Transparency International, we don't rank very high in terms of real estate or construction or even energy in terms of where people view ethics. And I think one of the things that we're proud of, and I know IFMA and RICS are both part of the International Ethics Standards Coalition, we're proud of the fact that we're bringing lots of organizations together to try to drive a standard view on ethics and really create some recognition in the marketplace about the behavior that's expected of professionals. Getting back to technology, technology has really driven a new way of working and a new way of living. Mobile internet has allowed us to work anywhere at any time, and it's boosting new types of businesses in markets that we wouldn't have imagined in the past. What it's also done on the flip side is it's really reduced transaction costs, and it's driven efficiency, which is great for the consumer, but it's also reduced profit margins, and it's put a lot of pressure on what we call traditional business models. And it's also, coupled with the fact that it's causing a lot of disintermediation and causing a lot of disruption in the market, and companies, multidisciplinary companies, are now able to come together, and it changes the kind of skills that they're recruiting for. As you can see from the graph, if you're younger, you tend to use mobile phones much more than if you're older, but at the same time, we see that entire graph increasing over time. So the digital revolution that comes with that, and you guys have all probably heard about the Internet of Things, the connectivity of different devices through Internet protocol allows you to really change the way that you manage assets, change the way that you control different types of environments and ecosystems. In my past life, I worked in the aerospace business, and airplanes and engines have the ability to capture lots of data and then ultimately send it down to a station ahead of time and let the maintenance crews know that I've got a fuel pump problem on #1 engine. Well, a chiller plant can do the same thing ultimately if you've got a control system on there. And we're envisioning through the Internet of Things that active maintenance of assets will allow troubleshooting, and will allow us to mitigate any disruption that happens or minimize the disruption that happens by having more active controls in place. The other thing on the digital side that we're seeing that will impact construction and will impact the way that we maintain property is 3D printing. What you see on the screen there is a picture of a small house, and we've seen a lot bigger now as construction has started to use this methodology, but you can completely 3D print a module like that, and imagine stacking them together to build a multifamily home. And then the whole idea around use of big data, and if we were live right now, I'd probably ask you, what do you think that is? And I'll give you a second here to contemplate what you think that is. It's a map of London, but the blue traces are in effect a layout of the tube map. And if you look at data on any given day of transport use in London versus Twitter use, it maps really nicely. So you get based on where people are using Twitter, you kind of get an idea of where they're going and how they're moving around. And really with smartphones, getting smarter every day with the data that's collected about where you go and what you do, ultimately those phones are allowing us to see how transport gets used, how facilities and properties get used to not only design smart buildings with that chiller plant that I talked about that calls out when it's got an impending maintenance issue, but smart infrastructure and smart cities that ultimately allow us to manage congestion and manage the flow of traffic. So the question, again, if we're live, we usually ask, how will real estate change? How will the property profession change? And at this point, before I kind of move on, I want to step back a little bit. And now that I've talked about the report, I want to at least show you the video and maybe talk a little bit about how facility management will change. So I'm going to switch over to a different platform here for 1 second. And I'm going to play this video. So So I'm going to put this back up. So it really, I think the video does a much better job of kind of going through our research and its applications to FM than I could ever do in the time we spend here. But there are some very specific ways that our profession is going to change. First and foremost, it will be disrupted. So the digital revolution is going to change whatever aspect of the built environment or property profession that you're in. And there are certain disciplines that are going to be more affected than others from a probability standpoint. Brokerage, appraisal, there are things that clearly will be impacted by technology. And we're already seeing that certain aspects of those professions, those disciplines, are being disintermediated and commoditized. And it's a challenge, I think, in terms of the skills for the next generation. There are some skills that are rising and some skills that are falling as a result of all of those changes, both the macro changes that are going on in the world as well as the business landscape. Specialization early in your career isn't necessarily what a lot of companies are focusing on. They're really looking at people that have holistic skills and taking their next generation through a series of different things so that, one, they don't specialize very early, that they have that holistic view, but two, over the long haul, they're able to not work in silos, but work in a very collaborative fashion. As we talked about ethics and conflicts of interest, we're putting a big focus on that across the profession. And also not looking at activity from a transaction perspective, but looking at it in a way that's sustainable so that it is around building relationships. So what are the skills that we're hearing through this research, through employers, that people are really looking for? Maximizing productivity, managing risk, having a client focus, being able to collaborate, data analysis. So really the focus of what a lot of things that we're looking at, in the IFMA RICS relationship, for example, is being able to provide a holistic view of what FM is about and the complexity and the technology that helps us deliver those services and deliver a strategic output. So what's needed today? Understanding technology, providing advice, being able to work interdisciplinary, and managing the complexity and trying to bring it to a point where we can communicate it in a very simple way so that our clients start to recognize the value that's being brought there. The other aspect of this is we're moving away from a specialist focus, into one that's around the client in combining some of the generalist capabilities. So there's a blurring lines of professional boundaries. And I'll look at one discipline, for example, in real estate. Valuation used to be pure valuation, and if you were going to provide portfolio management advice, that you were advisory services were different things. Now those are actually merging together. If you look in our world from an FM perspective, it used to be that the property got built, the blueprints got thrown over the wall, and then ultimately FM had to spend the next 20, 30 years of the life cycle of the property ensuring that we got the benefits of what was built into it in the first place. Well, now there's more integration in the design process with an eye towards maintenance. So the blurring of professional boundaries is really creating the need for multidisciplinary skills. It's also moving away from I build this building here and hand it off to someone else. So looking at an advisory-driven process that allows us through technology to make sure that we've got the right information shared. And again, the skills around data analysis and management and being financially aware through those technical skills are increasingly important, and things that we're hearing from the marketplace as really important in terms of what the future holds. This research and what you just saw really brought out 6 specific actions. So over the course of the last few years, RICS has been now spending time working with different groups in the marketplace to really get at what some of these actions mean. So winning the war for talent, it's increasingly a challenge, competing with the Googles and the Goldman Sachs of the world to attract the best and the brightest to this profession, to the real estate and the built environment professions in general, let alone FM. So really figuring out what the next generation is looking for, how to tap into their interests as early as possible to drive a career is something that we as an organization are looking at. Ethics, and really ensuring that everybody involved in that profession, from the time that the design's put together and the property's built to the life cycle that's managed, that there's a ethics at the heart of everything that's done, and that there's recognition by the marketplace that that's how we're behaving. Embracing technology and big data, I think there is no choice at this point, right? Ultimately, the world is moving at a pace that the technology will change and disrupt a lot of the core business processes that we have. So really, helping the market understand how the convergence of property and technology will help shape the next generation and help us drive to that future is key. Creating successful and sustainable future cities. So urbanization, as you saw in the video, 2/3 of the world will live in cities, and a number of these mega cities are coming together. It's a challenge for us to make sure that they're successful, and success means that you can live, work, and play in them, and that they're sustainable, and that they have an eye towards the future. This can be a challenge. I think it can be a challenge for the profession in general, but the challenge for us as professional bodies is helping the profession take advantage of new opportunities. As much disruption as being taken place through new business models and technology, increasingly there's as many opportunities that are created. And ultimately what we're encouraging the profession and employers and people that are professionals out there to do is to take a leadership position in terms of driving these changes. And we impact 70% of the world's balance sheet. Property assets are 70% of the world's wealth. I think we're uniquely positioned to help drive the changes that are happening in the marketplace. So how are we doing some of those things tangibly? One of the ways is by partnering in international coalitions. This happens to be a view of how property is measured globally, and it's measured differently in almost every market. And in the United States, even some cities, they measure property differently based on what the landlord association is driving. Ultimately, what that causes for the end user, the occupier, our client, is ultimately a variation that it could be up to 24% off. And that's in terms of, is it to the inner wall, the outer wall? Are we including the common areas? Are certain aspects of the property, the theoretical aspects versus the practical aspects included? That inconsistency drives occupiers to not necessarily know what they have for lease space and what they have in terms of workplace improvements and productivity for their employees. So managing that portfolio becomes increasingly a challenge, as well as benchmarking FM costs, to say the least. And it increases a whole host of risk for the occupier, which ultimately we believe by having consistent standards for ethics, for measurement, for the way we measure costs, the way that we exchange data, all of these international standards are one way of taking some action for the future. We've been very focused as an organization and as an industry on things like valuation, ethics, and measurement. We see the next wave coming up in terms of data and building information modeling, sustainability and risk management. Those are things that the profession across all the disciplines really could make a significant impact. And ultimately what we want to see through the embracing of all of these standards in the long haul our productivity gains and long-term value. And that long-term value ultimately helps the FM have a seat at the table, or helps us really drive a strategic change and have strategic impact to what's going on in the profession. So what does future collaboration mean? Bringing technology and property closer is one of the things that we're actually seeing as an opportunity for people that are in any of the built environment professions. So it will take training and skills. So the ability to use that technology to drive new business models and new workflow is significant. You know, we're looking at increasing the network that's available to professionals so that property and technology lifecycle players are really brought together in a culture of innovation. So instead of fighting that change, I think embracing it as a profession will help drive us to be more innovative. It definitely delivers more efficiency and allows us to deliver a better infrastructure with less resources. But it needs some clarity in terms of the standards that are applied. Along with that, when you think about standards, I don't think you can think about standards without having an appropriate enforcement or assurance regime that goes with that. So ultimately, QA of the data and QA of the methodology and the processes has to be put in place. And smart cities, we talked a little bit a few minutes ago about having smart buildings connected with smart infrastructure to enable smart cities. Well, those smart cities need new models of governance and new alliances in terms of how assets are managed, and probably investment that's beyond the public sector's ability to grasp. So having public-private partnerships in place, and then really defining what makes a successful city. You know, what is it that we're looking for? Is it simply a balanced budget? Is it crime? Is it a combination of things that make it the place that people want to do business, want to live, work, and play? And clearly, future collaboration implies a life cycle approach to asset management. In the past, as I said before, different disciplines worked in silos. And I think now, with technology, with some of these changes that are going on in the world, the action for us is to take a life cycle approach. And I know in the FM space, we've been doing that for a long time. Now it's bringing all the other professions that are involved in real estate assets together to do that. And then there's also the whole idea of addressing this inequality that's increasing. You know, securing land tenure and land rights, having affordable housing, especially in cities now where you've got massive urbanization, but affordability of housing is out of reach. And then employment and improved living standards all coming through education and the development of skills. But it doesn't happen overnight. And I guess one of the closing messages here is a proverb from a Chinese philosopher that a journey of 1,000 li, and I'd be hard pressed to tell you what a li is, but I think it's a very long distance. But it really starts beneath one's feet. So ultimately, what Lao Zi is asking us to do is to take some responsibility as professionals to help drive that change, because that change is happening around us. But ultimately, if the change that we see in our own work, in our own lives, isn't as quick as the change that's going outside of these four walls, ultimately it causes more stress into the system. So really the encouragement here is that this journey starts with your own feet. From an RICS and an IFMA perspective, I think we've started on that path. You may have heard of the IFMA RICS collaboration. You know, we've believed globally that the profession, the FM profession specifically, is fragmented. So we're out looking to create a global community. We want to integrate FM strategies across the entire life cycle. So making sure that as property is traded and valued, that FM and the net operating income that we generate is incorporated into that thinking. And we want to make FM a career choice for young professionals, the next generation, and really making that recognized. And you know, I happen to have gotten into FM by accident, having worked in the airplane business, but we want to make this a concerted effort to try to bring people in. So what the collaboration is trying to raise the profile and standing of the FM professionals on a global basis. IFMA's deep domain expertise and RICS's global platform combined to do that. We want to make it a more inclusive, robust community so that there is more knowledge share, not only by FM professionals, but by end users about what it is that FM professionals do, to create more prominence and visibility for the profession. And ultimately, it's a one-stop shop, right? We are driving the kind of thought leadership and insight that comes from the power of this collaboration. I'll leave you with this last thought. If you want to learn more about the futures, please go to rics.org/futures. If you want to learn more about the collaboration and how you can get involved, you know, send us an email at communications@ifma.org or go to ifma.org/RICS collaboration, because this collaboration is all about the future, and this research that we've done relative to where the profession's changing, we see this as one of the ways that that we can address those changes. So that's my entire presentation, and Josh, I'm happy to take any questions at this point in the remaining time that we have.
Okay, great. And just a reminder, if anybody does have any questions, feel free to type them into the question box on your control panel, and I'd be more than happy to present them to Neil. I do have a couple questions here for you. The first one is changing the public and board of directors perspective from one of maintenance to FM can be a muddy slog. How well is this going from your perspective at RICS?
Well, you know, it's interesting when you think about the public. I don't think they really know what we do in the FM world. I think the board of directors over the last few decades have started to wake up because of the impact that these assets that are on their balance sheet, whether they're leased or owned assets, by the way, right? So certain accounting treatment requires you to treat them a certain way. But besides all of that, I think there's significant value that can be added from that understanding by the board of directors. And these are two separate instances. I think there's one strategy for getting the public to be aware and ultimately make it a career choice for the next generation. And I think we are a ways off of that, and that ways being a few years before we really start to drive that traction. Whereas in terms of the board of directors, we are starting to see some change because of the impact that FM could have in a very strategic way. And I'll give you an example. 20 years ago, when I first got into the space, you know, and in aerospace, for example, where I started my life, maintenance was thought of as very value added because it was very expensive to take an engine off the wing and take an airplane out of rotation because you lost a lot of revenue. I think one of the things that you're starting to see with FM is that this workplace, whether it's a technology platform or a physical space, is so integrated with a business's ability to create value. People are seeing the impact of downtime and disruption. So I think the board of directors is really starting to change that perspective on the impact that FM as a strategic function is having. I think over time what we're going to see is the public will start to recognize that, and it becomes an attractive career choice for the next generation.
Great, thank you. This next question said, your presentation kind of dovetails with the first presentation we had to kick off World FM Week from Daniel Goldsmith, and they were discussing how, with respect to how property use will change, how and how strongly will repurposing and renovating figure in. For example, millions of square meters of floor space used in brick and mortar retailing may be available in locations with good transportation and labor force nearby.
Yeah, you see it already, right? I mean, I'll tell you what, I think if there's any one asset class that's really being repurposed and reused, it's retail. Obviously, office and commercial buildings have gone from being pure commercial to commercial and retail with mixed use. You're seeing properties in urban centers that are not only luxury residential with hospitality and hotel and restaurants, but in terms of suburban retail, you're going to have these mega super malls. I think in the United States, for example, what you're seeing is a lot of that reuse is already taking place, where retail is being regenerated for medical office, for other purposes, as opposed to just a pure strip mall mindset. And I think it's under tremendous pressure to a certain extent because of e-commerce, but also because I think we as a society, especially the developed world, are looking more for experience and not just for the purchase. So you can get a purchase and a transaction online, or you can go in and out of the store, but really to attract people and generate that traffic, retail has to create an experience, which is done typically in a mall-type environment, whereas a lot of the traditional strip malls through transportation are now changing in terms of how they're being used. And the other aspect of this is, and we have to start really thinking beyond kind of that refresh of that retail infrastructure, is what happens when you start to get driverless, autonomous vehicles. What happens as you start to see some of the changes that are going on relative to the use of property, not only in terms of retail, but in other asset classes. And it remains to be seen. It remains to be seen what happens with parking lots. It remains to be seen, how you're able to get from here to there, and it gets back to that era picture that I started my presentation with. The other aspects of this is, and this is well out in the future, is how does 3D printing affect retail? And I always go back to, as a kid, I loved sci-fi and Star Trek and those things, and they used to have communicators, and we call them iPhones now. They also had things that created food, almost like 3D printing. So you can imagine having the ability to scroll through different styles of sweaters and then ultimately having it 3D printed right there on site. So again, that whole experience in retail becomes more about the experience and less about the purchase. So anyway, I think I've kind of dragged on to that response, but hopefully that gives you an idea of what I think about the repurpose of those assets.
No, great answer. Just a reminder, if you have any questions, type in them into the question box. And it says, oh, here's one. On the one hand, specialization in the silos sense lessens. On the other hand, specialized skill is more important than ever. What implication for FM, as the Lima, consider doctors who must be both holistic and highly specialized?
You know what, I think that is a fantastic question, because you're seeing, and I'll look at the real estate services business in general, you're seeing kind of large, mega, generalist services organizations. You're seeing niche specialists that are very focused on, hospitality properties in the Caribbean. You're seeing the whole middle kind of get disrupted and either get consumed or get kind of broken up into specialist chunks. And I think you'll see more of that. I think you'll see more of that in FM. You'll see more of that in all of the real estate disciplines, where you're going to have these major mega brands, and there's 5 or 6 of them out there. And then you're going to see lots and lots of specialists, where a lot of the regional brands that you saw in the past may not necessarily win out, because the large guys have a global platform and lots of different capability. But when they need some specialist capability, they may bring in somebody that's very niche and very focused. And we see that already to a certain extent in the way that mergers and acquisitions have happened in this space, the way that different companies have been combining. Look at CBRE's Global Workplace Solutions, and you've got, more recently Johnson Controls and the way that they've come together on that. You saw a few years back in Trammell Crow and how that was kind of put together into the CBRE business, Stahlbach Retail Real Estate Services, and JLL. So there is a lot of that happening over the course of the last 5 years, and I think you'll see more of that. But what you'll see are the big guys will have those generalist capabilities, and you'll have the very focused specialists that are only going to be able, are going to be able to deliver the niche that a lot of folks don't have the ability to do.
Excellent. Thank you, Neil. That wraps up all the questions we have at this time. If you want to go to the next slide, we'll go ahead and wrap this up.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate the questions, and I appreciate everybody's time. I'm going to keep flipping the slides for you, Josh.
Thank you. Okay, I just want to let everyone know we have some of the next few upcoming webinars we have for today. Akam and Jeff Williams will be making a presentation out of Toronto, and then Mohammed will be making one out of Saudi Arabia, and then Ted and Jeff will be doing one out, I think they're actually in Toronto for Facility Fusion this week. So excellent. I'd love for any of you to join us for those great presentations. Next slide, please. And I do want to let everyone know the FMCC does have an app. We would love for you to download and try it out. You can download it at iTunes or Google Play for both iPhone and Android. Next slide, please. And the IFMA FMCC STAG is always looking for volunteers. So if you have a great presentation that you'd like to give to the council, or an idea for a white paper, etc., we would love to hear from you. If you would just like to volunteer your time to help, please contact Ricardo. His email is on the screen now. He is the STAG chair, so he'd be the best person to contact. Next slide. And as always, we do at the FMCC like everyone to know the other councils and communities that are out there, and that they provide great resources to the FM community. Next slide. Okay, it looks like on that's all we have today. Neil, I want to thank you again for a great and interesting presentation. And everyone, I want to thank you for attending, and I hope you enjoy the rest of our World FM Week virtual conference. Have a great day, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Josh.
You're welcome.